So after 6 seasons we're here, 1970 with season 7, with which we have a new Doctor, the show being in colour for the first time, and a new format for the series, which grounds the show on Earth, rather than the greater cosmos. As with the previous post-regeneration serial, we have a lot to discuss, but perhaps even more this time, as although we don't have to talk about the process in its greater details last time, we have an entirely new format, the behind the scenes leading to this serial uniquely being shot on film, and a whole new companion. So let's catch up with events and begin season 7. So a bit of context is important. Unlike with the previous seasons, which had a few weeks between them, this time there was a 6-month gap between seasons. Because of this, there was a greater sense of build-up and tension going into this season, especially since the last time we saw the Doctor, he was being forced into his exile, where he was to have a new face, something which was never revealed to us. This allows Spearhead to make an immediate impression. Apart from the fact that we know it's now in colour, although this was something that not all viewers at the time of broadcast would have been affected by, the serial doesn't pick up with the Doctor, and instead we find ourselves in a radar tracking station, which is detected what is believed to be a series of meteorites, although they seem to be in formation. From there we are introduced to UNIT, who are sent out to investigate these meteorites, with them still being led by Brigadier Lethbridge Stewart. This also leads into the introduction of our new companion, Liz Shaw, who is being approached by the Brigadier for the job of UNIT scientific advisor. This is a good scene which reintroduces UNIT while also introducing Liz, with the Brigadier giving a brief history of the organisation, although there is a slight error as he says that there have been 2 attacks on Earth since UNIT was formed, with them having help from the Doctor on both occasions. He is obviously referencing the events at the Web of Fear and the invasion, although UNIT was only introduced in the latter, but I'll let that slide. This scene does a good job at revealing information about UNIT through the characterisation of Liz, with her being very set in her view of the organisation, seeing it as a secret service sort of thing, with her not believing the Brigadier about what the organisation is actually for. This scene is really good, as it's our first time seeing a down-to-earth view of the organisation, as it wasn't touched on in the invasion. There's a lot more to discuss with UNIT in this serial, but we'll come back to that in a bit, as we still have one other element to introduce. The Doctor's exile has begun, with a new face from his renewal. So this new face is kept hidden from the audience for quite some time, with him being found by UNIT and being taken to a cottage hospital where he meets with the Brigadier, which gives us a bit of a spin on the first meeting with a new incarnation. The lack of there being a companion with the Doctor during this makes it immediately different to the previous renewal, so by having the Brigadier as the audience stand-in here works well, enhanced by the fact that he didn't witness the process. The Brigadier is kind of a stand-in for both new fans and those who missed the War Games, as he has no clue what's going on. This either shock or disappointment is enhanced by the fact that the Doctor immediately recognises him, with the Doctor only then remembering he has a new face, and getting to see it at that moment, which given how the Doctor speaks about recent events, it would definitely only confuse matters for a layman. Compared with the previous incarnation's first appearance, he's a lot more tame and restrained here, seeming exhausted, although how much of this is just a facade is up for question, as by the end of the episode he's back on his feet, as if nothing had happened to him. I'll talk about this new incarnation's personality a bit later, as we don't really get introduced to it until episode 2, as episode 1 has him almost entirely in bed, with him only leaving at the end where he's kidnapped, but escapes before being shot. But luckily the soldier was a bad shot and missed him with only a burn to the scalp. This leads to the Doctor being returned to hospital, which he later escapes from before going in search of the TARDIS, which has been moved to London on the orders of the Brigadier. So this escape scene is great and pure comedy gold at times. First we have the Doctor hiding in the shower, then we have him stealing people's clothes before stealing a guy's vintage car, with him having serious trouble trying to use it. Then when he finally arrives at UNIT headquarters, he has an argument with the security guard who doesn't even get a word in. And fun fact, the actor playing this guy was the at the time producer Derek Sherwin, who stood in due to a problem with the actor they had originally hired. Once this is over, the Doctor and the Brigadier finally reunite on more equal footing, with the Brigadier being a skeptic of the Doctor, who responds with flawless logic.
How do I know that you're not an imposter?
But you don't. You don't. Only I know that.
This entire scene is perfect for introducing the new incarnation, instead of the slightly comatose version we've seen so far. Now we've got him properly talking and answering questions in his own vague way. We've got a mix of humour alongside character building, which helps to characterise him further. As the Brigadier currently has the TARDIS key, the Doctor is forced into the position of helping Liz identify what the meteorites are, but Liz steals the key for the Doctor, who thinks that he just wants some equipment from inside. But this was part of an attempt to escape, but he finds that he's trapped on Earth with the ship not functioning. Now I'll discuss what's exactly wrong with the TARDIS in a later review, as for the moment we don't know much, except that the dematerialisation code has been changed. This also goes for the Doctor's memory, as the Time Lord said that the secret of the TARDIS would be taken from him, but given he is aware of what the ship is, then that must apply to how to use it. With everyone introduced, let's get on to the villains and talk about this trio more later, once the plot has resolved itself, and we've got a better sense of all of them. So the villains of this serial are the Autons, a new foe but one who have become one of the most famous. This serial spends time explaining a lot about how they function and uses them for quite a few scary scenes. The meteorites contained part of a Nestine consciousness, this being a creature which controls the Autons and can put life into plastic. So the Autons aren't really built up to, with our first sight of one being where it's in the middle of the woods and on full display, although the episode 2 cliffhanger feels like it was there to be the big reveal. Admittedly, this probably worked better on broadcast, when this was on a fuzzy TV and potentially in black and white, but with the restored versions of today, including a HD version, it's very clear that one of the dummies is actually an Auton that is slightly moving, which is a problem with being able to watch the show repeatedly in good quality. Now, despite this dodgy reveal, the Autons are an amazing creation, taking plastic, but more notably the shop mannequins, and making them scary by giving them life. The shop mannequin is already a creepy thing, just these human-shaped and sized figures that stand in store windows with blank expressions or perhaps creepy faces drawn on them, but by making them into something which can move makes them incredibly scary. The scenes of the army awakening in episode 4 are great, as they just spring into life from their state of motionlessness before walking the streets, killing everyone in their path. There isn't a big battle scene on the streets, that's reserved for the plastics factory, and I'm relatively sure that the location chosen was the same place that the final battle in the invasion was filmed, which is kind of funny. Although the Autons are controlled by the Nestines, there is a more humanoid person who represents them throughout, that being Channing, who as we learn is an Auton himself, but for the majority is presented as being a bit of a weird human, who is present from almost the beginning, with him being the one to kidnap the Doctor, although why he kidnapped the Doctor at the beginning is basically not explained later. The only reason I can think of is because he's an alien, and so that's a threat to their plans. Channing isn't the only near-perfect human replica though, as a part of the Autons' plan is to create duplicates of many high-ranking people to replace them, and so when the invasion comes they can take over key positions in the world, or at least the UK. So this part of the plan is far more minor when compared to the killing side, with it coming towards the end, although being built up in the background from around halfway. This part of the plan does serve a double purpose, as it allows for a fake version of General Scobie who the Brigadier is forced to report to. We don't get to see much of Scobie prior to the Auton duplicate being released, but for the most part he seems to be a reasonable man, who tends to take the Brigadier at his word, while the Auton duplicate is the exact opposite. The purpose of the duplicate is to, apart from gain control over the military, is to recover the last Nestine from Unit HQ. The duplicate is also the first Auton to be destroyed by the Doctor during the attack on the plastics factory. This use of the duplicate also gives us an insight into how Unit operate, with it being clear that despite the soldiers being a part of Unit, they are still a part of the country's military, which is interesting and is something which will be expanded on in this season. That mostly wraps things up for the main plot points. All that's left is the characters, and we'll start with the familiar face of the Brigadier. So the Brig isn't much different to his previous appearances. The biggest difference between those appearances and now is that he is the audience avatar for a bit of a serial, with him being the one to react to the Doctor's new face, while also helping to ground the series, as there are no other continuing elements from the previous season. This aspect makes the Brig very important in this serial, but beyond that he does still play the role as the face of Unit, which is more pronounced here. Now there is a captain, that being Captain Hawkins, but he's quite limited compared with his predecessor, which is unfortunate as the captain role has been strong before, but given the shorter runtime alongside how many elements have to be introduced, it does make sense why he isn't. Liz is also quite prominent. With this being her first serial, it means that it introduces her to the world of Unit, allowing for her to be an audience stand-in for newer fans. She's a lot smarter than most that have come before her, with her standing out against Zoe by having a scientific background, which allows her to have more technical skills, which she can use to help the Doctor. She starts off seemingly being the only scientist at Unit, but with the Doctor's assistance when he shows up. The two of them are able to work out what the meteorite was, and later create the weapon to destroy the Autons and the Nestines. As a pair they work well together, with the Brig fitting in as the person who is there to have stuff explained to, meaning we have a somewhat similar dynamic to the previous trio, although it is slightly different due to the Brig not truly being a companion. Finally we have the Doctor, who I've talked about a bit so far in terms of the renewal, but there's plenty more. Notably we have his new personality, which is very different to his previous incarnations, with him being somewhat in the middle of the previous two. He's no longer a clown, with him being far more of a gentleman. His choice of outfit reflects this, with it having a sense of class and expensive taste, against the worn down, rough look of his predecessor. This new incarnation stands against his previous incarnation like it was night and day, which really helps to make him stand out. But beyond just that, he is also a lot more of a thinker, with his intelligence more pronounced. Unlike his first incarnation, his intelligence is far more in play, with it being less that he thinks highly of himself, and more so he actually has the skills and abilities that he says he has, making him far more practical. Despite this greater sense of intelligence and less humour, this incarnation is still funny, with notably his getaway from the hospital being full of joy and humour. Then we have his arrival at Unit, which gives us another bunch of laughs before things mostly calm down until the end. The serial also finally confirms that the Doctor is an alien, which while that may seem strange, the show so far has been very on the fence about it, with him saying he was human at one point and never raising suspicion about him not being a human before. But this serial is definitive in the fact that the Doctor is an alien, with it notably introducing the fact he has two hearts alongside his blood not being human. Now we had the fact that the serial was done on film. So the show traditionally would be recorded in studio with some location filming, but this serial is unique for entirely being shot on film and on location. This was due to a technician strike, which meant that this, alongside other programmes, were a threat of being scrapped. But Derek Sherwin decided to make the entire thing on location and on film. While this was probably more expensive, it gave this serial a far greater sense of scale and quality. There aren't any wobbly sets and the monsters look great, but since the entire thing could be staged and edited, it means that there is a greater sense of pace and no flubs or problems like that, which came up with a recording studio. studio. This makes it one of the slickest productions in the show's history, plus it allows it to be remastered in true HD, which just makes the quality pop even more. This would also be director Derek Martinez's final serial for the show, and it's quite a strong one to go out on, partly due to it being on film, but also because of its impact. We have colour, a new incarnation, and all these other unique elements or firsts of the show, and once more he introduces another iconic villain to the franchise. Likewise, this would also end Derek Sherwin's tenure as producer, with him only handling 2 serials because of the extended gap between seasons. While this does mean he has one of the shortest 10 years as the show's producer, he handled 2 great serials, with both of them being classics, which changed the show forever, not to mention just handling this massive changeover in the first place. So Spearhead from Space is great, an absolute classic, and knowing just how it changed up the show by bringing in the Earth-based format alongside colour, this serial is incredible in terms of its plot and script. Great pace combined with strong dialogue which draws you into the world of the characters. It also has a strong foe and doesn't rely on the previous one, like the previous renewal serial. For a serial which was a fear of being wiped out due to a strike action, it hit back hard by being one of the greatest the show has ever given us. It's somewhat surprising that it came from Robert Holmes, who so far hadn't proven himself to be the greatest of writers for the show, with one of the most notoriously dull serials under his belt. But this serial really improves on what was in the previous season, and takes the formula set up by the invasion and uses it to create a fun and exciting story, which grounds the show to earth. In all ways the serial is impressive, so let's see if now that everything's been set up, if the rest of the season is able to build on it.
I don't even know your name.
Smith. Dr. John Smith.
But with the TARDIS now stuck on Earth, the Doctor is called in by UNIT to assist with issues in a new atomic research facility, but what lies in rest underground will change humans' knowledge of their history forever. Next time, Doctor Who and the Silurians.